Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and today we are joined by Mike Martin, who is out here sitting in the woods with the wonders of technology. So, welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Can you start just by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're sitting in the woods?
Well, actually, the wilderness and the woods have so much to do with my journey and my story that I thought this was the appropriate place to stop and just enjoy this conversation, really.
Perfect. So, what do you do?
I am a wilderness meditation guide.
Oh, okay. That does explain a lot. We'll get back to that, I'm sure, in the course of your story. So let's just jump right in. Tell us
Sounds like a plan.
what was going on in your life when, you thought maybe that it wasn't worth living anymore.
So, depression and anxiety have always been pretty much the key words to describe my journey. And about 5 years ago, I was faced in my second divorce. I became homeless, and the last words that she said to my face was, "You're not worth anything to me or your children."
Oh my God.
So from there, that triggered everything that I had originally been carrying and led to me jumping in my truck and finding a spot in the woods and trying to end my life.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, I woke up the next morning, and this is where the story gets interesting and leads into how I found myself as a wilderness meditation guide. Because beforehand, I was an avid podcast listener. One of my favorite podcasts happened to be a hunting based podcast.
Okay.
On that on that episode, when I stumbled back to my truck that morning, was a Stoic author named Ryan Holiday, and the words that he started sharing about, quotes from the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius,
Mm-hmm.
it it changed my perspective instantly. As opposed to I had nothing to offer anybody, it was just time to be done. To if I could pick myself back up and reinvent my new reality, I would show my kids so much about how to deal with the adversities of life.
Yes.
And that's what I did. I got in the truck and kind of stumbled around for a couple of weeks, ended up in some talk therapy, and it was monumentally the pivoting point in my life when the conversation about meditation came up, which for a lot of us is one of those things where we think of like the old chant CDs, or the bald-headed Buddhist monk sitting still and silent and going for hours. That was my response. And then after that conversation, I went outside and I picked up my crossbow and I started going through the process of my nightly target practice, realizing every single thing that I just was told and argued with about what meditation is what I'm doing. And I put the crossbow down, and a couple days later took a hike, sat down and did that, the breathing and the slowing my thoughts. And lo and behold, it opened up the door to finding a new desire to be alive and be around.
Amazing. Amazing. And all that from just happening upon a podcast episode.
Exactly.
Well, not
You know,
happening upon it, it was there for you, but
right.
yeah.
Just kind of put in my place, like, hey, I know you're in this spot and things are that bad in your eyes, but if you open up your mind and you look at it from a different direction,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to go so much further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so interesting. And, you know, um, people can't see you because this is an audio only podcast. But Mike's just sitting here, he's got a beard and a bald cap and some sunglasses on his head. And, he's a manly man, and not who a lot of people would think of is a meditation guy. So I love that we're changing the conversation around meditation too, that it's not just for, the skinny ladies who do yoga or the
Right.
monks with the bald heads, it's for everybody, and it doesn't have to be just sitting cross-legged on the floor chanting. Like meditation
Exactly.
takes so many different forms.
You can sit in the woods, get eaten and attacked by mosquitoes, and still enjoy a few minutes of silence, collect your thoughts, which is something that, is very powerful and helpful for traumas. I
Mhm.
mean, going through that divorce and having that be the last thing spoken in my face, that was traumatic.
Absolutely.
That was one of those things that was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to face in my life. And
Hmm.
it also, getting out here in what I define as the safest place in the world, the
Hmm.
outdoors, it gave me an opportunity to examine those without the bias or without the story that I would normally tie to that, based on my depression, my anxiety. It gives you an opportunity to let go of all that stuff and just examine it for what it is.
Hmm. Yeah. The meditation is basically just letting go of all of those gazillion thoughts that are swirling around in our heads all the time. And it's just taking us out of that space, right?
Well, it's that, but in the process, it's giving you an opportunity to sit with those thoughts and learn from them, redefine your next steps.
Mm, yeah. Also very important. But you have to, yeah, you have to be quiet in order to let the new thoughts
Yes,
come in, right?
exactly.
Yeah. And it's not just like I've always found I love walking meditations, like just walking around the neighborhood, but just being really conscious of what I'm seeing, like noting, oh, look, there's a red flower in that garden and that person's front door is blue and just things like that instead of just walking blindly and just being consumed by whatever I was thinking when I left the house.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. And also things like painting the house, because you have to concentrate so much. It's very zen for me, especially the edging. It's tedious, but that's all you're thinking about is what you're doing. But
right. And that's something that a lot of the time when people come out with me on one of my meditative bikes, in the beginning they're a little bit skeptical about how meditation applies to them. But then by the end of it, they're like, man, meditation's been a part of my life, my entire life, through things that I do, hobbies, chores, whatever.
mhm,
And just learning how to zone into that, it, it's something that's intangible for all of us.
exactly. And yeah, like the Japanese tea ritual, they have
Right.
I don't know, they make green tea in a certain way with certain instruments, and you got to turn in a bowl and you got to turn the bowl so many times. And it's a whole thing. But because it's meditative, because you're so focused on doing these steps that it takes you away from everything else that you've been thinking about.
That's why the hiking aspect of what I do is so important because, for a lot of us, we get caught up in the rat race and we forget how to ever slow our minds down or just even sit still.
Exactly.
By the time you've hiked about 5 miles and you're ready to sit down for lunch, you're ready to actually sit still and, start to work through some of that stuff. And it's a lot easier.
Yeah. So tell me, what was it, just like instantaneous that you were introduced to meditation? You were like, yes, this is it, and this is what I'm going to do, or were there like more steps in there?
Well, I mean, as far as the overall, I'm going to get in on the program goes, that was pretty much, we had the conversation and then I picked up the bow. I realized what it was. But then it was really thinking about and examining my relationship with my outdoor activities. So that took a little bit. And then there was also the challenges that come with the depression, the anxiety, and just how overwhelming everything really was within those early pages of this chapter that I had to work through those first in order to really apply myself because with that, with those pages, it was social anxiety was something that really flared up as well as like, just outright fear of everything. So living in my truck at the time, I don't know how, but I managed to hold down a regular day job. And then at the end of the day, when you go through a drive through and get something to eat, it was practically impossible for me to even make a decision. So there'd be so many days that I'd go without even really eating anything just because it was that hard for me to, to problem solve and just pick out something simple and
Mm-hmm.
do simple things like that. So really, it was a matter of relearning all of that, those steps and all those processes to life before I ever truly began to invest myself in meditation. At first, it was kind of like that comforting tool, like, oh, I found something, so I'm doing it, but I'm really not doing it.
Right.
And then, as I started to get my foot back on the ground and get my feet going, that was where the meditation came truly into my life, and that opened the door to building spirituality, building connections, and became a major point in expanding just out of the survival mode of life.
Right. Right. So did you do all of that healing like on your own, or did you go to therapy? Like what else? Was there
I've
anything else?
I've been involved with talk therapy, and I've had the same therapist for the entire leg of this, for this entire reality, as I call it, which has been about 5 years now. So I do still actively do talk therapy. Everything else I do on my own, and I've done on my own as far as exploring things, practicing, and then reading, learning, just the simple ways that we gain knowledge throughout the course of our journey, regardless of what the motivation is for it.
Right. Right. Amazing. And that's a lot of it too. When we're thrown into this new version of life that we don't recognize and we don't recognize ourselves, it's it's important to just be open and stay curious and be like, okay, I'm obviously here to learn something, so let's try different things and
Exactly.
see what helps, and not everything's going to,
A
but
lot of the time, I've discovered that a lot of the time where we get the hang up or have the difficulty is that all of this stuff comes out of the unknown. All the
Mhm.
progress we make in healing journeys or really any stage of our life is in that unknown aspect, and it scares us.
Yes.
We want to fall back into what we consider safe, regardless of it if it's healthy or not.
Hmm.
That's our safety net. And through the course of talk therapy, I believe probably the most important piece of advice that I've ever gotten out of that was just an offhanded comment. Maybe you don't need to know. Maybe you need to just go and do. And when I got that, that really opened up like this whole new reality, or this whole new color palette, if you will, in order to
Hmm.
paint the new picture of what I wanted my reality to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is also really hard advice for somebody with anxiety to just be like, just let go of the results. Like it doesn't, because that's what anxiety is. We're constantly imagining all the different ways this could work out.
Right. And, actually with anxiety, because a lot of that comes out of trauma that
Mhm.
we experience, and we just hold it within our bodies, and we don't physically see how to let it go, or we don't physically let it go. I found this old Lakota Native American ritual that they used to do that, to me, practicing it on my own was so monumentally powerful and changing. Where back in their time, when there was a war and they'd send the warriors off to take care of things, they do things that were very unspeakable, or stay with them and would haunt them. And they would come together as a village, and they do this ceremony where they would have the warriors all get their weapons together and form a circle outside of the village. And the medicine man would go around to each one of them, and he would smudge and take care of their weapons within a spiritual aspect, have them sit them down on the ground, and then walk back to the center of the village, visualizing that I've let that go from my body. And I've adapted different ways of doing that aren't so ritually based or whatever, but
Mhm.
that physical seeing and physically touching and doing aspect of it is something that, whether you're out in the wilderness doing it or you're just at home, it helps. It can be life changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just, yeah, a lot of it is just making that conscious decision to let go of it.
Yeah, there's the conscious decision, then there's also the physical representation of it. And as I feel and as I discovered that physical representation of it in some way actually helps your body to understand that that trauma or that event that brought the trauma with you is no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, you're able to relax a little bit, and maybe the triggers become a little bit less over practice and over time. But being able to find a way to physically release those things and see it, it registers so much, and it is so helpful.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Most definitely.
So you discovered meditation and now you're a wilderness meditation guide. So
Yes.
how has life changed since that day in the truck and now? Like what obviously everything has changed, but you know.
Well, I mean, probably about 2 weeks before I found out the divorce was coming, is when it changed and started to look like a very nomadic kind of life. And ever since then, it's been just that, hiking and different outdoor activities and just kind of living out of my car and being peaceful and really enjoying existing. It,
Wow.
you know, it's an evolution. It looks kind of weird to most people, but I'm like, when I'm in the throes of a concrete world within, a regular, I guess, what we call regular life, it's still very hard. It's too much on me. So it was just easier to adapt and understand that this is what, you know, is comfortable for me. It's not comfortable for everybody, but this is what works for me.
Yeah.
And, when someone comes to me for support, a lot of the time it gets triggered out of outside the box sort of thinking, or I
Mhm.
guess I guess what they call holistic healing now. Because coming out here, throughout my life, I've done the outdoor thing growing up and as an adult, so this is natural for me. But for a lot of people, this is an environment that looks different, feels different, and it opens up the door for something different.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people who, yeah, have never been in the woods. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what it's all about. Um
Those are the funnest ones. Those are the best adventures ever. Those are the ones that I truly enjoy. Because when I first got into the line of work, I guess you could call it, it was through hunting sponsorship. You had to have an out social media presence, and everybody in the community does great how tos and check out this hunt and so on and so forth. But nobody, nobody in the community tackles mental health because of the stigmas around it.
yeah.
And I wanted to take that on because I felt like, to go back to the very beginning of this, had I had somebody in my corner just to listen to me,
Hmm.
I may not have tried that day. And I wanted to put that out there. So then it was kind of just a matter of figuring out the framework and developing not only what was comfortable for me, but also what would be comfortable for somebody else. And through my podcast, a lot of the conversations that I've had was with people that are outside of the outdoor community, ironically. So it lended itself to a lot of listeners that weren't involved in the outdoor sports or anything. They'd come to me with a curiosity and they were scared. They'd be afraid because, whatever, fall down a cliff, there might be a bear or whatever. So being able to walk them literally from their doorstep into an adventure like this is so much fun. It's so gratifying, not only for me, but more importantly for them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one of the great things about helping other people is seeing the change in them and seeing
Yes.
them, grow and improve and enjoy life more.
Which kind of leans and transitions into the other most important aspect of what I teach people and why I take them out is the skill set. You know, teach them how to build a fire, how to find and treat water, how to build a little shelter. It as I really started to reevaluate my view of what I do, it builds a self-worth and a
Mhm.
self-confidence that no one, no matter what they do, can take away from you. You can make the decision to say, because somebody said I'm so unworthy, that's what it is. But then you come out here and you build a fire from scratch and you're like, oh yeah, I got that skill set. That is pretty important because, I could save somebody's life by making a fire.
Mhm.
And it's like we make these conscious decisions, but this gives you something concrete and so outside the box that it becomes a pillar of building self-worth that so many of us don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And having those very basic skills to fall back on. Um, yeah, definitely builds confidence because you're like, I can do this. That's something very concrete that
Right.
you can be like, look what I can do. Like sure, you might be able to build a nice spreadsheet or, balance your checkbook, but like building a fire, like the very basic needs is something that just not sadly not everybody can do, but also just builds your own confidence that you can take care of yourself if you need to in a very, fundamental human way.
Right. And then, it does build simple, like it builds simple, it's a simple building block system. You're out here having fun on the adventure. You're not realizing the impact that it's going to have on your life, but it also gives you a visual and another reference point for how you can nurture yourself and take care of yourself as you're trying to heal from traumas or, you're
Mhm.
trying to work your way through different life events that you face. Because with a fire itself, you go around and you collect the material to make the tinder bundle. You got to nurture that as you
Yeah.
start to spark it and you get your flame. You're blowing air onto it and you're shaking it around and you're really nurturing it and it reminds you, yeah, inside right now I feel pretty bad, but if I can nurture a fire, then I can nurture this situation. I can nurture myself and bring myself back up to my feet and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important to remember. Like you don't just get a big blazing fire instantaneously. You have to start from a spark and gradually build
Exactly.
it up. The flower metaphor, they start from a seed, they grow underground for a long time before you can see it, and then
Right.
eventually you get a flower. And we're just the same way. We have to be nurtured and give ourselves time and patience.
But then the other cool aspect of the firework is the fact that once that fire is going, to kind of reference who's become my hero in life, Marcus Aurelius, and meditations, he talks about how the fire uses everything around it. It consumes that for fuel in order to burn higher. So it then becomes a way to transition and talk about our views on adversity or the way that we struggle through something. Because a lot of us want to just stop and quit when we
Yeah.
face something difficult. We
Yeah.
don't realize that moment or that challenge is something that we can take to improve ourselves. And it gets back to, that morning in the truck where, when I first walked in, number one, I was completely out of it because I had just tried to do what I did. But number two, even my thought process was like, this is terminal. This is gonna just take its
Mhm.
course and I'm just gonna be done. And then, lo and behold, you transition and you look at a fire and you realize I can consume this adversity and I can sharpen my skills. I can improve my character. I can make myself who I want to be.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. Awesome. Um, what would you tell someone who is struggling in the darkness, having suicidal ideations? What would you tell them now?
What I would tell them now is there's hope. You know, life has two faces, and neither one of them are any less real. Right now, you're sitting in the darkness, waiting for the sun to rise. Every day, there's a process within the circle of life where the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. And that works the same way with how you're feeling right now. Right now, you're sitting in the twilight and you're simply waiting for the sun to run the rest of the circle to rise again in the east. Give yourself that time and that grace to just embrace being alive. Even if you can't feel it, if you can't feel it right now, that's okay because the rest of it's going to come. And then I think to add on to that, because there's a lot of feeling like everything's broken down and you're lost when you're in those kind of places, when the darkness is highest. Daniel Boone once left a famous quote that says, God never created anyone to be lost. I may have taken a hike and ended up turning around for 3 or 4 days in the woods, but I've always found my way back. And the same is true for the emotions or the feelings that you're holding on to right now. It's okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. And thank you so
Most
much for
definitely.
being here. And um, I don't get as many men on this podcast as women, and so it's extra important that you were here and sharing your story because yeah, mental health and especially the topic of suicide among men is just so underrepresented.
It is. And, as we work our way through life and we come through the ups and downs of it, being able to share that story with somebody who might be a step or two behind you is so fundamental, so important because it's the support of the community. Like I shared with that example of the Lakota ceremony,
Hmm.
being there, whether you see it or you don't see it, you are a part of the community. You are a part of something special.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Most
And thank
definitely.
you for doing the work that you're doing and helping others. And I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much for celebrating not only my journey, but my work with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.